Today I'm going to tell you a story so raw and beautiful it'll stay with you long after the last word fades. A forbidden love, fierce enough to defy armies, between a lonely white widow and a hunted Apache warrior amid the merciless beauty of the Wild West frontier. That's the place where adobe walls stand alone against endless sky, where cottonwoods burn gold in autumn, and where the paths of two shattered souls cross in the shadow of cavalry patrols and ancient grudges. It all begins with the scrape of a door on a quiet afternoon, one tall stranger stepping inside without knocking, changing everything in an instant. A single moment of courage, and two lives are never the same again. Before we dive into this adventure, don't forget to smash that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from today. The trading post stood by itself, where the canyon spilled out into open desert, a lonely adobe structure raised years ago by a man who had poured both sweat and hope into its walls, only to die before either paid him back. His widow Elara Whitlock remained behind. Leaving would have meant money she didn't have, and a kind of courage the endless prairie winds had worn thin inside her. She was only 26, yet the desert had aged her into feeling twice that. Among the nearby Apache, the place had earned a quiet name, the Lodge of the Patient Woman. They came to trade only now and then, when they felt like it. He arrived in autumn. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned the color of burning gold when the stranger stepped inside. Elara was in the back room changing dresses, the little room where her narrow cot stood beside a trunk, holding every possession she owned. She heard the front door scrape open. Her heart jumped. She grabbed the fresh dress to cover herself and turned. A tall Apache man stood in the doorway, gray threading through his black hair. His dark eyes held steady, unflinching. "You need to leave," Elara said sharply. "Now." "This is my lodge," the man replied in calm English, the accent barely noticeable. "I do not knock." Elara stared at him, clutching the dress against her chemise. The air between them tightened like the sky just before lightning struck. "This is my home," she said. "I paid for it. You bought nothing." He stepped inside the room. Elara noticed immediately no rifle, no war paint, no weapon at all. "You live here because I allow it," he continued evenly. "This was my mother's lodge before the soldiers came. My grandfather Chaitin built these walls." The words hit her like a blow. For years she had wondered why the trading post stood alone untouched, why Apache bands passed through the land but never burned the place down. "So why let me stay?" she asked quietly. "You feed the children." His gaze drifted toward the shelf where Elara kept sacks of cornmeal and jars of dried apples, the things she gave away more often than she sold. "You do not cheat them. You are not afraid." Then his eyes met hers again. "And you have nowhere else to go." She should have been angry, but she recognized truth when she heard it. "I'll finish dressing," she said stiffly. "Wait outside. I will wait here." He sat down on the floor against the wall, facing the door instead of her. "There are soldiers coming from the fort," he said. "They search for me." Elara's hands froze. For weeks, cavalry patrols had been sweeping the territory, hunting Apache bands who refused the reservation. "What did you do?" she asked. "I lived." His voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. That was enough. She pulled the dress over her head, fumbling with the buttons. When she turned back, she noticed something strange. The man had kept his eyes away while she dressed. "How long will they search?" she asked. "Until night. Perhaps longer." He studied her carefully. "You could tell them I am here," he said. "They would pay you. I don't want their money." "Then you are a fool." "Maybe." Elara smoothed her skirt, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest. She had lived long enough in this country to know what the cavalry did to Apache men caught outside the reservation. She also knew what settlers thought of white women who helped them. "Stay quiet," she said finally. "I'll send them the other way." The man's face did not change, yet some tension eased from his shoulders. Why? Elara looked around the room and the walls Chayton had built the place that had sheltered her these last 2 years. Then she looked at the man, who could have taken whatever he wanted, but instead had given her the truth. "Because I'm living in your lodge," she said, "and you don't knock." The soldiers arrived less than an hour later. 6 riders came with them, led by a young officer whose uniform still held the stiffness of new cloth, Captain Dorian Hale. The men behind him were troopers under Rafe Calder, dusty from the trail. Elara stepped into the yard with flour on her hands. "Afternoon, gentlemen." Captain Hale tipped his hat. "We're tracking a hostile Apache," he said. "Might be armed. You seen anyone ride through here? No one today?" Elara answered calmly. "Just you?" The lie came easier than she expected. She pointed toward the northern canyon. "But I did hear horses up that way this morning. Could have been wild stock, though it sounded like more than one." The captain studied her face carefully. Elara held his gaze without blinking. Her husband, Rowan Whitlock, had taught her that much before pneumonia took him how to lie when the truth cost too much. "You live out here alone?" the captain asked. "I manage." He didn't like the answer, but after a moment he nodded. When the soldiers finally rode north, their horses disappearing into the canyon shadows, Elara stayed still until the dust settled. Then she went back inside. The Apache man stood at the window watching. "They believed you," he said. "They believed what they wanted to believe." Elara walked past him to the stove, pretending to busy herself. "That I'm a helpless woman who couldn't lie if she tried." "You are not helpless." He stepped closer. She caught the scent of sage and worn leather. "But you are alone. So are you." Silence filled the room, thick with words neither of them spoke. At last he said, "My name is Kairo. It means the one who walks last." "I know a little Apache," Elara replied quietly. "Not much." "Enough." She glanced at him. "I'm Elara Whitlock." "That name means you endure," Kairo said simply. "Only the strong endure this land." Elara gave a tired laugh. "I don't feel strong. I feel exhausted." "Strength is not the absence of weariness," he said. "It is continuing anyway." Something inside her cracked open. "My husband died 2 winters ago," she admitted. "I wrote my family back east, but they never answered. I suppose they're ashamed I married a poor prospector and ended up here." She stirred a pot of coffee that didn't need stirring. "Some days I think about walking straight into the desert and never coming back, but you do not." "No." She poured 2 cups without asking. "I feed the children. I trade fair. I survive." She handed him the cup. "It's not much, but it's what I've got." Their fingers brushed for a second. "It is enough," Kairo said. They drank in silence, while evening shadows stretched across the room. Something in the air between them shifted something neither of them had a name for. Finally, Kairo spoke again. "The soldiers will return tomorrow. They will watch the trails." Elara hesitated. "Then you'll have to stay here until it's safe." Kairo studied her. "You know what they would do if they found me here?" "Yes." Her voice was steady. "I know exactly what they'd do. And still you offer this." Elara turned away, unable to hold his gaze. "You can sleep in here. I'll take the front room." "No." His hand caught her arm, firm but gentle. "You keep your room. I will watch." That night, Elara lay on her cot, listening to him move quietly through the trading post, checking doors, windows, the dark lines of sight outside. She should have been afraid. Instead, for the first time in 2 years, she felt safe. And when sleep finally came, she dreamed of walls that held strong against the wind. Kairo stayed 3 days. The soldiers searched the canyon and found nothing, their patrols slowly drifting farther away. During those 3 days, Elara and Kairo spoke little. But they learned much. She watched how he moved through the trading post, as if he knew every board and nail, because once long ago he had. And he watched how she rationed her food carefully, so there would always be enough left for the Lero, the Apache children who wandered in, hungry, offering nothing but shy smiles in trade. On the second evening, the question that had been circling Elara's mind finally found its way out. "Why do you keep coming back here?" she asked quietly. "If this was your mother's lodge." "Doesn't it hurt to see it turned into something else?" Kairo sat near the table repairing an old leather harness Elara had meant to fix for weeks. His hands moved with quiet certainty, pulling the needle through worn straps. "I come to remember," he said. "My mother Iskara died after the soldiers forced us onto the reservation. My sister Ayasha caught spotted fever that first winter." He paused. "My wife, Nira." The name lingered unfinished. Pain flickered across his face before he forced it away. "She walked out into the desert the next spring. I found her 3 days later." "I'm sorry," Elara whispered. The words felt thin, almost useless. Kairo didn't look up from the leather he was stitching. "The reservation broke something inside her," he said calmly. "Something that could never be mended. She was not weak. What they did to our people shattered her." Elara's thoughts drifted to her own darkest hours, those moments she had stood on the canyon rim, wondering if stepping forward would hurt less than staying alive. "I understand," she said softly. Kairo raised his eyes to her. "Yes," he replied. "I believe you do." On the third evening, he told her he would leave at dawn. The words struck Elara harder than she expected. Something tightened in her chest, a feeling she had thought buried with Rowan Whitlock. "Where will you go?" she asked. North, Kairo answered, cleaning his rifle with careful hands. "Into the mountains. Some of our people still live free there." He checked the chamber, then added quietly, "You should come with me." The words hung in the room like smoke from a dying fire. Elara stared at him. "What, come north?" He set the rifle aside and stepped closer. "You have nothing here except survival. In the mountains you would have people. A place." "I'm white," she said. Kairo closed the distance between them. "You are a woman who feeds our Lero, who lies to soldiers to protect us. The mountains do not care about the color of a person's skin." Elara's mind spun. She thought of Boston, of her mother's parlor-polished furniture, delicate china cups. The life she had once been expected to live. That world had turned its back on her the moment she chose Rowan Whitlock, a stubborn dreamer chasing gold that never came. Now the desert had stripped everything from her except bone-deep determination. "I barely speak Apache," she said weakly, even as she knew the excuse sounded hollow. "You will learn." Kairo reached out slowly, giving her time to step away. She didn't. His hand brushed her cheek. "I have watched you these 3 days," he said. "You were never meant to live alone. You were meant to belong somewhere." The simple touch broke something inside her. Elara closed her eyes as tears slipped free, mourning the girl she once had been, mourning the distance between that girl and the woman standing here now. When she opened her eyes again, Kairo had not moved. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I." His thumb traced her cheekbone. But I am more afraid of leaving you here. Afraid I will return someday and find this place empty, and you gone. You'd really come back, she asked. I have come back every season since you arrived. The truth in his voice left no room for doubt. At first I watched you, he admitted, to see if you were like the others. Then I stayed to understand why you were not. He hesitated. And now, I come because I cannot stay away. Elara lifted her hand and pressed his against her face. She thought about all the lines she had crossed already, the lies told to cavalrymen, the quiet defiance of settlers, the invisible boundary between their two worlds. But she also thought about the past 3 days. 3 days of conversation, 3 days of not feeling alone, 3 days of being seen as a person, not a burden. If I go with you, she said slowly, I won't do it because I'm desperate, or grateful, or because I have nowhere else to go. Her voice steadied. I'll go because I choose it. I would accept nothing less. He pulled her close, and Elara rested her head against his chest, hearing the slow beat of his heart. I am too old for games, Elara Whitlock, he murmured. I have lost too much to waste time on anything but truth. She pulled back slightly. My family cast me out. I'm stubborn, difficult, and I don't know if I remember how to trust anyone. Kairo held her face in both hands. I am a hunted man who has watched his people destroyed, he said. There is anger in me I cannot always control, and memories that wake me at night. His voice softened. We are both broken. A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps we can be broken together? The kiss came quietly, gentle, uncertain, desperate all at once. Elara tasted salt on her lips. Tears hers, his, maybe both. Something inside her opened like a flower long closed against the cold. When they finally pulled apart, her hands trembled. I need time, she said, to think, to be sure. Take all the time you need. He released her slowly. I will return in 7 days. If you choose to stay here, I will respect that. If you choose the mountains, we will ride there together. He studied her face carefully. And if the soldiers return before, then tell them the truth that you saw me and let me go. I will not let them punish you for protecting me. Elara shook her head. If they come back, she said quietly, I'll lie again. She squeezed his hand. I'll lie until I start believing it myself. Her gaze hardened with quiet resolve. No matter what I decide about the mountains, I won't betray you. That night, Kairo stayed in her room. They did nothing but lie beside one another while darkness pressed against the trading post windows. Elara traced the scars across his arms and shoulders, marks left by bullets' blades and years of survival. Kairo touched her face as if memorizing every line. I never thought I would feel this again, he said into the darkness. Not after Nira died. I believed that part of my life was finished. What changed? She asked softly. You. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You with flour on your hands. Lying to soldiers. Refusing to give up when giving up would be easier. Tears slid silently down Elara's temples. She had cried more in 3 days than she had in the last 2 years. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to trust something like this. Neither do I. He kissed her forehead. But perhaps we learn together. At dawn, he left. Kairo slipped away before the sun fully rose, disappearing into the pale desert light. Elara stood in the doorway, watching until the horizon swallowed him. The trading post felt different now, empty in a way it never had before. And she realized something she had never understood until that moment, loneliness was not the same as being alone. Loneliness was knowing exactly what was missing. The 7 days crawled by like 7 long years. Elara kept working, trading with the occasional travelers from Brant Holloway, giving food to the hungry Lero, sweeping the same dust that returned the moment she turned her back. But her thoughts were far away. North, in mountains she had never seen, with a man who had offered her a life she had never imagined. On the 5th day, a visitor arrived. The woman was Mexican, perhaps 50 years old, with weathered hands and sharp, observant eyes. She spoke in a mix of Spanish and broken English. Elara understood enough to follow what she was saying. "You're the woman Kairo talks about." The words came without hesitation. Elara Whitlock's heart skipped. "You know him?" she asked. The woman nodded and set a woven basket on the counter. "My name is Yuma," she said. "Sometimes I trade with his people. I bring supplies that Tavok cannot get anywhere else." She pushed the basket toward Elara. "Kairo sent me." Elara felt her chest tighten. What did he say? Yuma's expression softened, but her voice stayed steady. "He said the soldiers now have orders to sweep the northern mountains. They mean to drive everyone out." She paused. "The time to choose is now, not in 7 days." Elara's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned pale. "I haven't decided yet." "Yes, you have." Yuma reached forward and placed her hand gently over Elara's. "You decided the moment you lied to those soldiers. You decided when you let him stay under your roof." Her eyes held Elara's. "And when you touched him, and let him touch you." Her grip tightened briefly. "The question isn't whether you'll go. The question is whether you're ready to admit it." After Yuma left, silence filled the trading post again. Elara sat alone at the small table and forced herself to think clearly. She began listing the reasons to stay. Safety, familiar ground, the thin comfort of routine. Then she forced herself to list the reasons to leave. Kairo, the mountains, the possibility of belonging somewhere instead of merely surviving. The second list was shorter, but it weighed far more. Before dawn the next morning, Elara began to pack. She took only what her saddlebags could carry: 2 dresses, a few books, her mother's silver locket. It was the last thing she owned from her old life. She added dried food, blankets, salt matches, and ammunition for the rifle Rowan Whitlock had taught her to use. Everything else she left behind: the furniture, the supplies, even the building itself. Before mounting her horse, she walked slowly through the lodge one last time. Her hand slid across the adobe wall Chayton had built long ago, walls that had once sheltered his family, and later sheltered her. She thought about how lives overlapped, how one story quietly carried into the next. Nothing was truly lost if someone remembered. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, "for keeping me alive and for bringing him to me." She pressed her palm against the wall. "I'll honor what this place was, I promise." Then she rode north. The sun was just climbing over the desert when Elara followed the directions Yuma had given her. The dry plains slowly gave way to scrub-covered hills. The hills rose into rough foothills. Beyond them, the mountains climbed skyward like stone fortresses. For 3 days she rode. She slept beneath the open sky, covered her tracks carefully, and watched every horizon for cavalry patrols. None came. On the 3rd evening, she reached the valley Yuma had described. A narrow stream ran cold and clear through the grass. Tall aspens crowded the slopes, their leaves whispering in the wind. Pine scented the air. And there beside the water stood Kairo. When he saw her riding down the trail, he rose quickly. Hope and disbelief flashed across his face. "You came. Elara slid down from the saddle, her legs shaky after days of riding. I came. Kairo crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides and wrapped his arms around her. In that moment, Elara felt something inside her settle firmly into place. Something she hadn't even realized had been loose. They stayed like that for a long while. The horses grazed nearby. The creek murmured over smooth stones. The mountains watched silently, ancient and unmoved. Finally, Kairo spoke. I thought you might not come. I thought I might not be brave enough. Elara leaned back slightly to meet his eyes. I still don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. I don't know how to live the life you're offering. Kairo smiled faintly. Neither did I when I first came here. He gestured toward the valley. Between the trees, she saw scattered lodges, thin threads of smoke rising into the evening sky. I had to learn, he said. Everyone does. He took her hand. Come, I'll show you the place that will be your home. The camp was small, perhaps 40 people in all. Most were Tavok families who had refused the reservation. A few Mexicans lived among them, and even 2 white men who had chosen exile rather than submission. They watched Elara arrive with quiet caution. She understood immediately. She would have to earn her place here just as she had earned her place at the trading post. Kairo's lodge rested against a natural rock wall that shielded it from winter winds. Inside, everything was simple, but well arranged. He showed her where supplies were stored, how the smoke hole vented the fire where water could be gathered from the stream. Elara listened carefully. Her survival now depended on skills Boston had never imagined teaching her. That night, they lay together for the first time as lovers. There was nothing uncertain about it, no awkward hesitation like her wedding night years ago. What passed between them was something deeper, fierce and tender at the same time, a silent promise about the life they were choosing together. Later, they lay wrapped in blankets beside the fire. Elara rested against him, her head on his chest. What if you regret bringing me here? She asked quietly. I might. His honesty didn't hurt her. You might regret coming, he continued. We might both wake someday and wonder what we've done. That's not very comforting. Kairo brushed his lips against her shoulder. I do not offer comfort. I offer truth. He paused. But I believe we will not regret it. I believe we will build something here that neither of us could build alone. A life. Elara turned to face him. Firelight flickered in his dark eyes. I spent 2 years alone in the desert telling myself survival was enough, she said. Her hand touched his face. I won't survive 2 more like that. She took a breath. I'm staying because being here with you is the first honest choice I've made since Rowan Whitlock died. Kairo kissed her slowly. In that moment, the final walls inside Elara Whitlock finally fell. For years, she had believed the desert had killed the part of her that could hope. But here in Kairo's arms, in this hidden valley, where the hunted built lives and the powerful tried to erase, something inside her began to breathe again. Not hope exactly. Something steadier. The certainty that surviving was not the same as living. And for the first time in years, Elara Whitlock was ready to live. Over time, they taught each other how to survive in ways neither of them had known before. Kairo showed Elara how to live from the land. He taught her how to start a fire without matches, how to read the stars and find north when the wilderness swallowed every trail. He showed her how to move silently through the forest and listen to the language of wind and animals. Elara, in turn, shared pieces of the life she had once known. She taught him how to read and write English. She explained numbers and calculations that made trading easier when merchants like Aldrich Fenmore passed through distant towns. She even taught him a strange game from her childhood chess, using pieces they carved from small blocks of wood. One evening, she beat him for the third time. Kairo leaned back and laughed softly. "You are a strange woman," he said. "You came from a world of comfort. Yet you are not soft." Elara moved the carved pieces back to their starting places. "Boston wasn't as gentle as you imagined," she said. "The rules were simply different. There were things people were allowed to do and things they were not." She glanced around the valley. "Out here the rules are simpler. Work hard, share what you have, protect your people. Everything else is decoration." Kairo smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened his usually guarded face. "You sound like one of us. Maybe I'm becoming," Apache Elara replied lightly. But there was truth behind her words. Kairo shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You are becoming who you were meant to be. The person you might have been if the world had never tried to shape you into something else." Spring arrived with news from the south. Riders carried word that the cavalry had been called away. Trouble in the eastern mining camps had pulled soldiers away from the territory. For the moment, pressure on the mountain camps had eased. Some of the Tavok families considered returning to the reservation. There was food there, medicine, protection from starvation, even if freedom came at the price of submission. Others refused the idea completely. Kairo was among them. "I will die in these mountains before I die there," he said flatly when Elara asked what he thought. "On the reservation, we are already ghosts. Here we are still ourselves." Elara understood his words, even if they frightened her. The valley was beautiful, but fragile. Their survival depended on isolation luck and the thin line between being forgotten and being discovered. Every day carried risk. But every day was also a choice, and Elara had learned the power of choosing. During the summer of her second year in the mountains, she realized she was pregnant. The knowledge struck her with equal parts wonder and fear. She had never carried a child before. Her marriage to Elara Whitlock had ended before that dream could ever become real. And now she was preparing to bring a life into a world without doctors' medicine or the safety of towns, only the wisdom of women who had done this for generations. When she told Kairo, he said nothing at first. They were sitting beside the creek, watching trout flicker through the shallow water. Elara waited while the silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke. "I have lost children before," he said quietly. "2 sons. Both died of sickness. One before Nira died, I know," Elara said gently. He had told her during the long winter nights. "I'm sorry." Kairo turned toward her, and she saw tears in his eyes that he made no effort to hide. "I am afraid to hope again," he admitted. "Afraid to want this." Elara took his hand and placed it softly against her stomach. "I'm afraid too," she said, "but we can be afraid together. Remember?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, together." A faint smile appeared on his face. "Boy or girl, I don't know." She tilted her head. "Does it matter?" Kairo shook his head. "No, as long as they inherit your stubborn spirit and my aim." They both laughed, the sound echoing softly over the creek. In that moment, Elara realized something profound. Life insisted on continuing even in places where survival seemed impossible. Hope itself was an act of rebellion against despair. Winter returned before the child came. The birth arrived late in the season during the coldest stretch of the year. It was long and painful. Elara screamed until her throat burned raw while the Sonara women held her steady and whispered encouragement. Outside the lodge, Kairo paced like a trapped wolf, powerless to help. At last, the cries of a newborn filled the air. The women wrapped the small squirming child in soft rabbit fur and placed her carefully on Elara's chest. A daughter said Zarella, the midwife. Strong lungs too. She'll do well. Elara looked down at the tiny face eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. A fierce love rushed through her so suddenly it almost frightened her. This fragile, impossible little life belonged to both of them and to something larger than either of them alone. The stubborn promise that life would go on. When Kairo finally stepped inside, his face looked pale beneath his copper skin. He knelt beside Elara, slowly staring at the baby, as if afraid she might disappear. "She's real," Elara whispered. "You can hold her." Kairo reached out with one careful finger and brushed the baby's cheek. The infant turned instinctively toward his touch. "She's perfect," he said softly. "She's ours." Tears slipped down Elara's temples. What shall we call her? They had spoken of names before, but never chosen one. Now Kairo studied the tiny child, then glanced at Elara. "Sira," he said at last. "It means mischievous. She has already caused trouble by coming into this world." Elara repeated the name quietly, feeling the shape of it on her tongue. "Sira." Kairo nodded. "Sira Kairo." Elara agreed without hesitation. Her own surname, Whitlock, belonged to a life she had left behind. Better that the child carry a name rooted in the mountains she would grow up in. "But if soldiers ever come," Elara said quietly, "we can call her Whitlock, to protect her." Kairo's expression hardened. "If soldiers come," he said firmly, "we will already be gone." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I will never let them take you. Or her." Elara believed him. In 3 years she had learned one thing about Kairo above all else. He never made promises he could not keep. Time passed in the slow rhythm of seasons. Sira grew quickly wild and fearless, speaking Apache before she ever spoke English. She ran easily through forests and meadows, wary only when strangers from Brant Holloway or other settlements passed nearby. She inherited Elara's gray eyes and Kairo's dark hair. Anyone seeing her might struggle to guess where she truly belonged. But the truth was simple. Sira belonged to the mountains. Elara watched her daughter grow and realized what this life had truly given her. Not safety. There was no real safety anywhere. Not comfort. Not the soft luxuries her mother in Boston once considered essential. But something far greater. Freedom. Freedom to run through the aspens. Freedom to learn skills that mattered. Freedom to belong somewhere. One evening years later, Kairo asked her quietly, "Do you regret it?" They sat outside their lodge while the sun set behind the mountains. Nearby, Sira played with the other Lero children. Elara thought of Boston, of the trading post, of the many versions of herself she had shed along the way. "No," she said, "I regret nothing." She leaned her head against Kairo's shoulder. "Not even the hardship. Especially not the hardship." "Why?" he asked. "Because it showed me how strong I really was," she said. "It taught me I could survive things I once thought would destroy me." Kairo kissed her temple. "You are the strongest person I know." Elara shook her head. She watched Sira laughing in the fading light. "I'm not strong," she said quietly. "I'm just someone who kept walking when stopping would have been easier." She smiled faintly. "I think that's what strength really is. Just continuing." As Sira grew older, Elara began teaching her to read and write, using the one precious book she had carried from the trading post. Kairo watched these lessons with interest. Before long, he joined them. "Our daughter must know both worlds," he said one evening. "She must understand Apache ways to live here. Then his voice grew more serious. But she must also understand the white man's world, because that world will not leave us alone forever. He was right. When Sira turned 6, soldiers rode into the valley again. This time they were not hunting. They had come to negotiate terms. The officials came with polite words and careful promises. They said the government wished to settle matters peacefully with the bands that still refused the reservation. Land would be given, they claimed. Food would be provided. The children would receive schooling. Kairo listened to every word without interrupting his face, unmoving, carved from quiet stone. When the officer finally finished speaking, Kairo answered in clear English so there could be no misunderstanding. "We want nothing from you. Leave us in peace." The officer standing before him was older now, Captain Dorian Hale, the same man who had once searched the trading post years earlier. His eyes lingered briefly on Elara Whitlock, recognition flickering there, perhaps even a trace of respect. "I'm afraid that isn't possible," the captain replied. "These lands are being opened for settlement. People like Roland Mercer and others are already moving west. Eventually, you'll be forced out anyway. It would be wiser to come willingly." Kairo's voice remained low, but carried the weight of unshakable certainty. "These mountains belonged to our people long before your grandfathers were born. We will not abandon them." The soldiers eventually rode away, but Elara knew the matter was far from finished. That night she lay awake beside the fire while Kairo slept. Across the lodge their daughter Sira breathed softly in her blankets. Elara listened to that steady rhythm and wondered what kind of future waited for the child. In the morning, she shared the thought that had been growing in her mind. "We should move deeper into the mountains," she said, "somewhere even harder to reach. New valleys, new hiding places." Kairo studied her carefully. "And when they find those places too?" he asked. Elara hesitated. "Then we move again." She looked toward the peaks rising beyond the valley. "We keep moving until there is nowhere left to run." Kairo squeezed her hand. "And then we fight. Or surrender." Those were the words she hadn't wanted to say. She shook her head slowly. "There's another ending." He waited. "We teach Sira everything we know," Elara continued. "Both ways of life. If one world disappears someday," her voice faltered, "she will carry its memory forward." Kairo watched her in silence for a long time. Sadness filled his eyes, but so did understanding. "You are wise," he said quietly. "We will do as you say." Soon after, the camp moved again. They packed only what they could carry. Anything left behind was burned so the soldiers would find nothing useful. Not everyone chose to follow, but enough did. They eventually settled in another valley far higher in the mountains, colder, lonelier, but hidden. Life there proved harder. Game was scarce. Winters stretched longer and harsher. Illness sometimes claimed the children's sickness that medicine from the lowlands might have cured. The old rarely survived many winters in that bitter air. Elara felt the years settling onto her faster than before. The altitude, the cold, and the constant watchfulness wore on her bones. Still, joy found its way into their lives. Sira grew tall and fierce. She learned to track deer through snow, to hunt, to heal wounds with herbs and quiet prayer. She spoke both Apache and English with ease, walking between worlds that were slowly drifting farther apart. Eventually, she fell in love with a young warrior from another band. His name was Varin. Kairo approved the match. The young man was hard-working, kind, and fearless when facing the long winters. At Sira's wedding, Elara stood among the Sonara women watching the celebration. Time had marked her face with sun and wind. She was nearing 40 now, her hands strong and rough from years of mountain living. Yet inside she felt more complete than she had ever felt in Boston. That night, as she and Kairo walked back to their lodge beneath a sky blazing with stars, he asked softly, "Are you happy, yes?" Elara answered without hesitation. "And you I am." He pulled her close. "I thought I would die alone and bitter. Instead, I found peace with you." Elara smiled faintly and turned to face him. "We're not finished yet." Kairo kissed her. "You gave me a reason to live instead of merely surviving. You gave me Sira. You gave me a home." Elara returned the kiss and whispered, "You gave me the same. Everything that truly mattered. I found it here." The years passed. They grew old together in the high country, watching Sira raise children of her own. Around winter fires, they told the grandchildren stories of Boston, of deserts, and of the lonely trading posts that had once changed their lives forever. Soldiers rarely came anymore. New wars and distant conflicts drew their attention elsewhere. The camp grew smaller with time. Some families chose the reservation. Others simply passed away. But those who remained held fiercely to their freedom. When Elara turned 52, sickness settled deep in her lungs. Kairo cared for her through the long winter, bringing warm tea broth and blankets, sitting beside her bed while she struggled for breath. He told stories from his childhood, stories of Iskara, of Chaitan, of the world before soldiers and fences. One quiet evening she spoke. "I think my time is close." "I know," Kairo said gently. His voice stayed calm, but tears shone in his eyes. "If you go first, I will follow soon enough." Elara squeezed his hand. "We have lived too long side by side to walk separate paths now." She wanted to tell him to stay for Sira, for the grandchildren, but she knew it would be useless. Their lives had grown together like two trees sharing the same roots. "It was a good life," she whispered. "It was." Kairo kissed her forehead. "Better than I ever deserved." Elara closed her eyes, exhaustion weighing heavily on her body. "Thank you, Kairo, for seeing me, for choosing me." Kairo smiled faintly. "And thank you for lying to those soldiers." Elara laughed weakly. "And thank you for walking into my lodge without knocking." The laugh dissolved into coughing that shook her chest. When it finally passed, she was weaker than before. "Stay with me," she whispered. 3 days later, Elara Whitlock died with Kairo holding her hand and Sira weeping quietly beside them. Her final memory drifted back to the trading post, to the moment a stranger had stepped through the doorway and changed her life forever. Kairo followed her 6 weeks later. One evening, he simply lay down and never rose again. They buried him beside Elara on a ridge overlooking the valley. Stones marked the place, but it was the stories that truly kept them alive. Sira carried forward everything they had taught her, the languages, the skills, and the stubborn belief that freedom was worth any price. She raised her own children with both Apache names and white names, teaching them that identity was never a single thing. It was a choice made again and again. Years later, when she herself had grown old, Sira would sit beside the fire and tell her grandchildren about the white woman who came to the mountains and the Apache man who loved her. She spoke about courage, about choosing your own path, about how home was not always a place. Sometimes it was simply a feeling you carried within you. One child once asked quietly, were they happy Sira thought of her parents, of the way they had looked at each other even in their final days? Yes, she said. They were happy. They chose each other when the world told them not to, and they never regretted that choice. Not once. The children listened, and the story became part of their own history. The trading post was long gone. The mountains were filling with settlers like Roland Mercer and others. The world Elara and Kairo had defended slowly faded, but the love they had created remained. Because love does not disappear, it endures, it chooses, and even when everything else is lost, it continues. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.